For 8 years, Tracy Scott never spoke. Not a word. Not a laugh. Not even a cry. And then one morning, she looked up at a man she shouldn't have known and said, "Hi," just like that. The silence was over. Sean Scott's breath caught in his chest. For 8 years, his daughter had lived in perfect silence. Now her laughter spilled out like sunlight breaking through a locked room. He staggered to a stop in the driveway, his phone slipping from his hand. Across from her, the man crouched low, his tailored black suit brushing the pavement. Grant Garcia. A name Sean knew only from whispered warnings and sealed files. A mafia boss who shouldn't be anywhere near his child. Sean's finger hovered over the screen to summon security, but he froze. Tracy was smiling. Not the rehearsed smile she gave therapists. Not the tight-lipped one for photographs. This was real joy. Unscripted. Uncontrolled. He replayed the scene in his head as if trying to prove it wasn't real. His daughter's mouth had moved, but not randomly. Not like the countless attempts specialists had watched with desperate hope. She'd formed a word. A perfect, impossible word. And Grant Garcia hadn't bribed her, hadn't touched her. Hadn't used any of the high-priced tricks the experts had tried. He was simply kneeling there, speaking to her in a low voice, showing her a card trick like she was just another kid. Sean's voice cracked in disbelief. Did our baby just? She spoke? 8 years of silence shattered by one perfect word. And it was a word spoken not to her father, not to a doctor, but to a man from the underworld. But to understand how they had arrived at this impossible moment, you have to go back to the sterile rooms, the failed therapies, the mansion full of quiet, and the stranger who'd been watching from a distance. Before we begin, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. To understand how they reached the impossible moment, the billionaire's daughter speaking to a mafia boss, you have to go back, before the word, before the laughter, before the man in the black suit knelt beside her on the sidewalk. There was only silence. The house that whispers built. The Scott estate was the kind of place that looked perfect from a drone shot. 3 wings, 10 bedrooms, smart glass windows, imported stone. The grass was surgically trimmed, the air always smelled of eucalyptus, and everything was curated. Tracy Scott lived here like a porcelain figure in a glass museum. Surrounded by beauty. Separated from life. She had her own wing, decorated in soft pinks and beiges, with floating bookshelves, a cloud-shaped sensory bed, a skylight that mimicked daylight cycles. Every room connected through sliding panels and automated climate controls, each space designed to soothe, stimulate, or encourage communication. But the walls had heard nothing from her. Not a laugh, not a cry. Scheduled childhood. By 7:30 each morning, Tracy's day was already in motion. Her private chef delivered a customized macrobiotic breakfast on a tray shaped like a teddy bear. Then came her physical therapist, light stretching for neurological activation. At 9, her speech specialist began drills using visual cues, puppets, digital mirrors. At 10:15, the neurolinguistic specialist arrived. By 11, she was exhausted. So was everyone else. The playdates were scripted. Children of investors or celebrities flown in by assistants. Play areas monitored by security and lined with cameras, each interaction cataloged for progress. There were no accidents, only data, and still, Tracy said nothing. Sean's fortress of control. Sean Scott watched it all from the security hub in his office. Screens lined the wall, each one showing a piece of his daughter's day. He had become a collector of strategies, a curator of interventions. His calendar wasn't filled with board meetings anymore. It was calls with neurologists, child psychologists, experimental therapists from Sweden, Japan, and Argentina. Every dollar he'd earned had one purpose now, unlocking his daughter's voice. But all it bought was silence. Every time a new specialist failed, Sean reacted the same way. By firing someone, and hiring someone else, and increasing the pay. Money could bend the world, but not her voice. He told himself it was just about finding the right person, the missing piece. But deep down, in the pit of his perfectly tailored chest, he feared the truth. Maybe no one was coming. The silent diagnosis. Dr. Felicity Huang had flown in from Geneva, a world expert in neurodevelopmental disorders. Tracy sat across from her in the playroom, hands folded, eyes tracking every move. She's not intellectually disabled, the doctor told Sean later. Her comprehension is remarkable. Her motor control is fine. Brain scans are clean. Then why won't she speak? Sean asked, trying to keep his voice level. The doctor hesitated. Selective mutism, likely trauma-based. But there's no clear cause. No abuse. No neurological defect. Which means she's choosing not to speak. Sean finished. The doctor gave a tight nod. That night, Sean stood outside Tracy's room, watching through the glass. She was sitting cross-legged on her bed, sketching with colored pencils. A family of birds, it looked like. One was off to the side, alone. He didn't know why, but it broke him. A world inside her eyes. Tracy didn't need words to communicate. Her eyes did the talking. When she liked something, they sparkled like champagne. When she was scared, they went wide but never teared. And when she was curious, those moments were rare. Her pupils dilated like a camera lens drinking in light. She used sign language fluently, but only with people she trusted, which meant a tiny list of rotating nannies, and sometimes just the housekeeper, Alma. More often, she preferred to draw. The walls of her suite were lined with her art. Entire worlds. A whale with a bow tie, a girl holding a kite string tied to a star. A lion reading a book in a library made of clouds. She didn't speak, but she expressed. No one seemed to listen. Alma's whisper. Alma was nearing 70. She moved slowly now, but with the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen generations of wealth try to outspend sorrow. One morning, as she folded Tracy's laundry and watched the girl curl up beside the window, sketching again, Alma shook her head. "We've given her everything?" Sean muttered from behind her. Alma didn't look up. "Maybe not what she needs." Sean didn't answer. Alma didn't expect him to. The man who watched. It started with a hunch. Luis, the head of security, flagged a small detail. An unregistered vehicle parked 2 blocks away. Same spot 3 times in a week. No movement. No visible occupant on camera. A matte black Dodge Charger. Aftermarket plates. Tinted too dark. Not your average car for this neighborhood. When asked if he wanted the police called, Sean said no. Not yet. Instead, he had Luis install 2 more hidden cameras at the property edge. He told himself it was probably nothing. Someone lost. Maybe casing another house. But something cold slithered in his gut. The window that shouldn't have been open. It was a Thursday when it happened. Tracy was in her reading nook, flipping through a picture book silently. A staff member passed by and noticed her window was ajar. Not wide, just slightly. Enough to invite sound or smell or voices. Sean reviewed the footage. No breach, no entry, but something strange caught his eye. At exactly 11:47 a.m., Tracy looked up. Straight at the window. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Then she smiled. One of those rare, flickering smiles that came and went like a hummingbird's wings. That night, she drew something new. A man in a black suit, crouching on a sidewalk. A girl in a pink dress. Both smiling. There were no faces. Only shadows. Sean stared at the sketch long after she fell asleep. He didn't know who the man was. But he knew this much. He hadn't seen that smile in 8 years. The stranger on Maple Drive. The engine purred low like a jungle cat, barely restrained under the hood of the matte black Dodge Charger. It sat idling 2 blocks from the gates of the Scott estate, steam rising gently from the vents like breath in cold air. Grant Garcia adjusted the cuffs of his black jacket and rolled his neck once. Muscles popped like tightening ropes. He stared through the windshield at nothing and everything. Perfect houses, perfect lawns, a street so clean it looked sterilized. Maple Drive. He hated streets like this. They were too quiet. Not the kind of quiet he grew up with, the kind that came before a gunshot, before a door got kicked in. No, this was curated silence. The kind rich people paid for. Sterile. Dead. He killed the engine and stepped out. His boots crunched softly against the curb. No one paid him attention yet, but they would. He didn't belong here. Didn't care. Grant had come for one reason. A debt. The wolf enters. He walked past manicured hedges, designer fences, and wind chimes that clinked like champagne flutes. His eyes scanned for security. 2 cameras at the corners, 1 motion sensor under the gutter. Private systems, expensive ones. The Scott mansion loomed ahead. Glass and stone, symmetrical, perfect. A fortress in disguise. He wasn't here to break in. Not yet. Grant had spent weeks tracking Sean Scott's assets. Offshore accounts, shell companies, the works. It all started with a deal made years ago between Sean and a now-dead associate of Grant's. A deal that stank of arrogance and unpaid favors. Sean owed the kind of people you didn't ghost. He'd buried it under contracts and lawyers, but the streets never forgot. Grant could have walked up to the front gate and demanded what was owed, but something made him hesitate. A sound. Soft. Innocent. He turned his head. A little girl sat on the curb at the far end of the estate's long wall. Pink dress, golden curls catching sunlight. She crouched, dragging colored chalk across the concrete with careful strokes. Her tongue poked out slightly in concentration. No guard in sight. No nanny nearby. Just her, alone, the ghost of someone else. Grant was halfway past her when he stopped. It hit him like a fist to the gut. Familiar, unwanted. He blinked, and suddenly it wasn't Maple Drive anymore. It was a sun-bleached sidewalk in San Felipe. Summer air. A little girl, 5, maybe 6, sitting on a busted stoop drawing stick figures with crayon stubs. Her hair was darker, curlier, but the smile, it was the same, his daughter. Before the shooting. Before her blood soaked his shirt. Before the streets stole what was left of his soul. Grant swallowed hard, throat dry as bone. He looked again. This wasn't her. Of course not. But something in his chest cracked anyway. The first spark. The girl looked up. Big eyes, watchful, cautious, but not afraid. She stared straight at him, the chalk pausing in her hand. Grant should have kept walking. He knew better. Knew this wasn't his world, and this girl wasn't his to care about. But he crouched beside her anyway, hands resting on his knees, voice calm and even. "Cool picture," he said. She blinked. Then she giggled. A small, breathy laugh like a bell in fog. Grant didn't move. She drew a line between 2 stick figures. A heart floated above them. He tilted his head. "Looks like love." No response. Just a faint smile. A door in the distance creaked. A shadow moved. Probably a housekeeper or security. Grant rose smoothly, nodding once. "See you around, sunshine." Then he walked off, before anyone could question why a man like him had paused near a child like her. Back in the Charger, he sat behind the wheel, gripping the leather until it groaned. What the hell are you doing, Garcia? He'd come here to shake a billionaire. To make sure a debt long buried got dug up again. This wasn't about kids. It wasn't about her. But her laugh stuck to him like the scent of old perfume. Familiar. Dangerous. He ran a hand down his face and started the car. Not today. He comes back. The next morning, Grant parked in the same spot. He told himself it was just to observe, to get a feel for the rhythm of the estate. Strategic positioning. But when he saw her again, same pink dress, same patch of sidewalk, he knew that was a lie. She was drawing again. This time, she looked up before he even got close. Her tiny hand waved once. Then she scooted aside to make room. He didn't hesitate. He sat. No guards, no alarms, just silence and chalk. And her. They didn't speak. Not yet. But she smiled at him like he'd been expected. And for the first time in years, Grant Garcia felt something close to peace. What if the person sent to destroy your family became the one who saw you most clearly? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Should Grant have walked away when he saw Tracy, or was fate already in motion? The third morning came with the same suburban calm, the kind that hid its secrets behind trimmed hedges and quiet driveways. Grant Garcia stood beside his Charger again, sipping from a paper cup of gas station coffee that tasted like regret. He hadn't meant to make this a routine. He hadn't meant to come back at all. But there she was again, Tracy, sitting on the same curb like clockwork, chalk dust on her fingers, the pink of her dress soft against the concrete. He approached with measured steps, scanning the street for any sign of security. Tracy looked up as if expecting him, scooted a little to the left, and offered a piece of blue chalk. He took it without speaking, crouching beside her like they'd done this for years. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was familiar. He drew a stick figure beside hers, then added sunglasses. From a second-story window in the mansion, Lorna, the live-in nanny, froze with a half-folded towel in her hand. She leaned closer, blinking at the sight below. Tracy was alone again, unsupervised, and now a stranger in a dark suit was beside her, sketching on the ground like some reformed convict from a made-for-TV movie. Her heart jumped. She dropped the towel, grabbed her phone, and bolted for the stairs. Grant didn't hear the panic inside the house. He didn't sense the blur of motion behind glass or the nanny's frantic shouting to the head of security. His focus stayed with the small girl beside him, who was now tracing a sun over their chalk drawings. Her eyes sparkled with something he hadn't seen in a child in a long time. Safety. Comfort. Trust. Footsteps thundered down the gravel path. Lorna came into view like a missile locked on a target, her voice shrill. "Step away from her! Now!" she yelled, nearly breathless. Two estate guards appeared behind her, hands already hovering near holstered weapons beneath their jackets. Grant stood slowly, hands open, unthreatening. Tracy stood too, but she didn't look scared. Her tiny fingers reached for Grant's pant leg and tugged once. He looked down. She tilted her face up to him, cheeks flushed, eyes wide. And then she said it. "Hi." It wasn't loud. It wasn't practiced. It was raw and real and reverent, like the word had been waiting inside her chest for years and chose this moment to be born. Lorna froze mid-step, one hand over her heart. The guards stopped moving. Everything, time, air, reason, halted. Grant blinked, but he didn't show surprise. He knelt down again, level with Tracy's eyes. A gentle smile formed at the corner of his mouth. "Hey there, sunshine," he said softly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And Tracy giggled. Lorna stumbled back a step, her mouth open. She spoke. She whispered, then turned and sprinted toward the house. Her voice echoed down the halls. "Get Mr. Scott! Now!" Upstairs, a housekeeper dropped a tray. Someone tripped over a rug. Sean Scott was on a call in his home office when the door burst open. "Sir, it's Tracy," the butler gasped. "Outside." She spoke. The phone clattered to the desk before Sean even registered the words. He didn't bother with shoes, just tore down the stairs in socked feet and a half-buttoned shirt. Outside, Tracy and Grant were still on the curb. She was showing him something, pointing at a crooked rainbow she'd drawn over their stick figures. Grant nodded with approval, drawing a mustache on the sunglasses. Sean came around the corner like a storm in human form, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. "What the hell is going on here?" he roared. Tracy turned first. She didn't flinch. She smiled. And then, just as easily as before, she said again, "Hi." Sean froze in his tracks. His brain couldn't compute what his eyes and ears were delivering. For 8 years, silence had been Tracy's only language. Now, one word, and not to him. To him. "You," Sean growled, pointing at Grant. "What did you do?" "Who the hell are you?" Grant rose slowly, his expression unreadable but calm. "I didn't do anything," he said. "She did." "Don't play games with me," Sean snapped, stepping forward. The guards moved in closer, unsure who they were protecting anymore. "You show up out of nowhere, and suddenly my daughter starts talking. What kind of trick is this?" Grant looked down at Tracy, who was now watching the adults with growing confusion. He put a hand on his chest and said, "She drew. I listened. That's all." Sean's rage faltered under the weight of those words. They felt too simple, too soft, to come from a man who looked like he belonged behind bars. But Grant didn't budge. He didn't act defensive or smug. Just honest. The moment lingered. Then Grant stepped back, turned to Tracy, and said, "I'll see you around, sunshine." She waved. He walked past Sean without flinching. No threats, no fear. Just a quiet exit down the street like he hadn't just shattered a decade of medical silence with one conversation. Sean stood there, breathless, trying to hold on to a reality that no longer made sense. Tracy tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy," she said quietly. He dropped to his knees, heart hammering. "Sweetheart." His voice broke like a brittle branch. "Say that again." But she only smiled and hugged him. And didn't say another word. Back to the present. The flashback ended, dissolving into the stillness of Sean's study later that night. He sat alone in the dark, the city skyline flickering beyond the glass wall behind him. His glass of scotch remained untouched, his phone lay silent, and yet, his world had never been louder. He played the security footage over and over, Tracy's voice hitting him like a punch to the chest every time. "Hi." That was it. One syllable. The word that shattered everything he thought he knew about his daughter, and about what it meant to help her. None of the specialists had gotten that word. No therapist. No treatment. But he had. Grant Garcia. Sean rubbed his eyes, exhaustion chasing fury. Who was this man? Why Tracy? Why now? He needed answers. But more than anything, he needed sleep. Somewhere down the hall, Tracy laughed softly in her sleep. And Sean Scott, for the first time in years, didn't feel entirely in control. He just felt hopeful. It happened again 2 mornings later. Grant Garcia, dark suit, darker eyes, walked the same slow, confident pace down Maple Drive, hands in his coat pockets like he owned the street. He didn't knock, didn't call ahead, just appeared, like something summoned. Tracy saw him from the window before anyone else did. Before Lorna could react or security could intercept, the front door flew open, and the little girl was sprinting barefoot down the stone steps, laughter trailing behind her like ribbon. "Sunshine," Grant greeted, crouching as she collided with his chest in a full-body hug. She whispered something in his ear. Quiet, soft. He smiled like it was the only word he'd needed to hear all day. Sean stood on the balcony above, robe cinched tight, coffee cooling in his hand. He didn't understand what he was seeing. His daughter, once locked in silence, now glowed like a child reborn. And at the center of it stood a man with a criminal face and the calm of someone who'd buried more than secrets. The staff stood nearby, watching like spectators at a miracle they couldn't explain. Grant didn't linger at the gate this time. He stepped through the threshold like it was familiar, like he'd been invited. The guards looked to Sean for orders, but he said nothing. Not yet. Instead, he watched as Grant and Tracy sat cross-legged on the grass, heads bent together over a deck of cards. "What's this one called?" Tracy asked in a whisper, pointing. "Queen of Hearts?" Grant replied, flipping the card with a flourish. "Just like you." She giggled, eyes wide. He showed her how to hide the card up her sleeve, then slip it back into the deck when no one was looking. It was the first time she had ever learned something with joy rather than pressure. Days passed like that, unplanned and unsupervised. Tracy began to speak in soft, scattered syllables, usually to Grant. Sometimes it was a question, sometimes a joke, but always her choice. Grant never asked her to talk, never praised or recorded or reported her progress like the therapists did. He just existed in her world, fully present, unbothered by silence. He taught her to spray paint graffiti on a canvas in the garage, colors bursting like rebellion. He told stories from the streets, gritty and wild, but softened for her ears. He called her Sunshine. She called him G. It was simple, pure, undeniable. Sean tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself it was a phase, a coincidence. But one evening he watched them from behind a tinted window, Tracy on Grant's shoulders, both of them laughing so loud it echoed through the gardens. And something inside him cracked. The next morning, Sean approached Grant directly. They stood on opposite sides of the study, sunlight catching the dust in the air between them. "She's attached to you," Sean said, voice low. "It's unsettling." Grant said nothing, just waited. "I want you to stay," Sean continued. "As her companion, officially. We'll compensate you, of course." Grant's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in principle. "I'm not for sale," he said. "Not for her. Not for you." Sean narrowed his eyes. "So what do you want?" "Nothing," Grant replied. "Just to be near the one person who doesn't see me as broken." Sean couldn't argue with that. He didn't trust Grant. but he trusted what Tracy had become around him. And that was a battle he'd already lost. "Then stay," Sean said. "But understand, if you hurt her, I will end you." Grant smiled, not out of amusement, but understanding. Fair enough. That night, Sean ordered a full background check. Not the kind his corporate lawyers ran. Deeper. Black ops. Whispers from former fixers and mercs. What came back was a dossier thick enough to collapse a coffee table. Grant Garcia. Born in East Harlem. Record sealed at 17 for aggravated assault. Enforcer for the Marquez cartel by 21. Suspected in 4 homicides, all uncharged. Linked to racketeering, gun smuggling, and at least 2 cold cases involving political targets. Disappeared 10 years ago after the death of his daughter, presumed murdered in a botched ambush on a rival gang. But no violence since. No arrests, no confirmed sightings. Just quiet. Sean read the report twice, then a third time. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, Grant returned like always. Tracy met him at the door like a child, welcoming her hero home from war. Sean stood behind her, report in hand. "I know who you are," he said, voice hard. "I figured," Grant replied. "Took you long enough." "You're dangerous." "I used to be," Sean clenched the folder. "Why her?" Grant looked down at Tracy, then back up. "Because she's the first person who didn't flinch when she saw me." Sean said nothing. But Tracy did. She stepped between them, looked her father in the eye, and said, "He stays." 2 words. Clear, confident, final. Sean didn't argue. If someone with a dark past brought light into your child's world, would you let them stay? Sound off below. Would you trust Grant with your child after finding out who he really is? The whisper started slow, like rot under polished wood. Somewhere in the dark corners of Grant Garcia's old life, news began to ripple. The ghost was alive, and he was living in daylight now, spending time in mansions, around billionaires, playing babysitter to some mute heiress. It didn't make sense, which made it dangerous. And when the underworld doesn't understand something, it eliminates it. Grant felt the shift before it showed. A black SUV idled too long at the corner of Maple Drive. A stranger paced past the estate gate twice in the same hour, never looking up, but never looking away. He caught the subtle signals. Car windows rolled down just enough, reflective lenses aimed where children played. He'd lived long enough to know when he was being watched. He didn't mention it to Sean. Not yet. No need to panic the man who already trusted him less than his own shadow. Instead, Grant tightened his routines, kept Tracy closer, eyes always scanning. But no amount of paranoia could prepare him for what happened next. It was late afternoon when it struck. Sun bleeding gold through the trees, Tracy playing hopscotch on the garden path. Grant had stepped away for mere seconds, talking to the groundskeeper about irrigation lines. Then, boom. A thunderclap of sound tore through the estate, sharp and sudden, like a shotgun fired into open air. Tracy dropped to the ground, hands over her ears, body trembling like a leaf in wind. Grant was there in seconds, shielding her with his body, eyes sweeping the treetops. No smoke, no shooter, just the deliberate sound of power reminding him he wasn't untouchable. The explosion had come from the tool shed, a controlled detonation, not meant to kill, meant to send a message. Sean arrived minutes later, security swarming, guns drawn, panic ignited. "What the hell happened?" he shouted, already pulling Tracy into his arms. She clung to him, but didn't speak, not even a whimper. Her voice, fragile and new, had retreated behind the curtain of fear. Grant stood back, fists clenched, jaw set. "That was a warning," he said coldly. "They're not done." Sean turned to him, fury bubbling beneath the surface. "Who are they?" "My past," Grant answered. "And they just found out I care about something again." That night, the estate went on lockdown. Windows reinforced, routes altered. Sean's private security detail doubled. Tracy slept in her father's room again, curled up between Egyptian sheets and sleepless eyes. Grant didn't sleep at all. He sat alone in the gardener's shed, now scorched and blackened, fingers tracing the dented metal. And then, his mind pulled him backward, years ago. A different blast, a different girl. Her name had been Isabella, 6 years old. Caught in a crossfire, Grant never saw coming. He remembered the smell of cordite, the sting of smoke, the weight of her in his arms. Small, bleeding, asking him if she'd done something wrong. He lied, said she hadn't. Lied again when he said it wouldn't hurt. She died before the ambulance arrived, and Grant hadn't spoken her name in 10 years. That night, he whispered it aloud. Isabella. And with that name came everything. The guilt, the rage, the reason he walked away from the life that had once crowned him king. He could bury bodies, but not memory. Could silence guns, but not regret. Tracy wasn't his daughter, but something about her, the stillness, the sadness, the silence, had reopened a place he thought long dead. The next morning, he asked to speak with Sean privately. They met in the sunroom, doors closed, tension high. Sean didn't offer coffee. Just a nod to begin. This isn't just about her, Grant said, voice quiet but firm. She saved me too. Sean tilted his head, skeptical. From what? From who I was, Grant said. From the man who let his own daughter die in his arms and disappeared into a bottle of blood in silence. Sean looked away, the words hitting harder than expected. You had a daughter? Grant nodded. She would have been Tracy's age, maybe older. I was trying to buy her out of the life. A safer city, a better school. But the past doesn't let you go. It hunts you down like it just did. There was silence between them, heavy as stone. Then Sean spoke, softer than before. Why didn't you tell me? Because you'd never have let me near her. He was right. Sean knew it. But he also knew something else now. Something uncomfortable and true. Grant wasn't here for redemption. He was already living it. From that day forward, something shifted. Sean didn't smile. Didn't shake hands. But he stopped ordering Grant off the premises. He let him sit with Tracy, unsupervised. He watched, quietly, as the girl who once lived behind a wall now bloomed in the presence of a man who had once built those very walls for others. Tracy's laughter returned slowly over the following days. But her words came back slower, more cautious. She didn't talk about the boom, didn't ask what it meant. But she began to draw again. Images of fire, of flowers rising from ash, of a man in a black coat shielding a little girl from shadows. Sean saw the drawings, said nothing. But he began to question himself in ways he never had. Maybe silence wasn't a problem to be fixed. Maybe it was a language, one he had never bothered to learn. Grant and Sean never called each other friends. But there was an understanding now, an uneasy alliance formed not by trust, but by shared scars. And in the quiet spaces between danger and healing, Tracy found something no doctor had ever offered her, a reason to speak again. The kidnapping. The morning started like any other. Sun spilling over the marble floors of the Scott estate, the hum of sprinklers in the garden, Tracy sitting cross-legged beside a chalk mandala. Grant had arrived late the night before after one of his long drives. He never said where he went, only that it helped him breathe. Sean had started to tolerate his comings and goings, convincing himself the man would fade out eventually. But that morning, the driveway stayed empty. By noon, Grant Garcia was missing. At first, no one panicked. Grant wasn't the type to text or call when he left. He was a shadow, not a schedule. But when the sun dipped past the hedges and his phone went to voicemail for the 6th time, Sean felt the pit open in his stomach. Something was wrong. A man like Grant didn't disappear unless someone made him. That someone had a name. Or many. Word came through an old contact of Sean's, a lawyer with hands in both stocks and sin. Grant had been grabbed the night before in a warehouse district near the harbor, ambushed by 3 cars, dragged into a van. The men who took him were professionals, ghosts from the underworld he'd tried to leave behind. And they wanted answers. Grant woke up tied to a chair, wrists shredded from zip ties, mouth dry as concrete. A single bulb swung above his head, casting long, accusatory shadows. The man across from him smiled like a shark with a secret. You forgot the rules, Garcia, he said. No one just walks away. They didn't care about Tracy or the Billionaire's mansion or Grant's Reformation tour. They wanted loyalty. Proof that the man who'd once ordered executions without blinking hadn't gone soft over a rich man's little girl. They beat him slow. Fists first, then questions. What does she mean to you? How much would Sean Scott pay to keep you breathing? Are you still one of us, or should we finish the job? Blood ran down his temple, but Grant didn't scream. He just closed his eyes and thought of Tracy's laugh, the way it cracked through silence like sunlight. They could break bones, but not the bond. Not what she'd given him. Not the quiet redemption he'd never asked for, but found anyway. Back at the mansion, Sean stood stiffly in his office, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows, fists clenched behind his back. His advisors sat around the table, sober-faced, voices tight with caution. "You don't want this mess," one warned. "It's underworld business. Intervening makes you a target." Another nodded. "Let it burn itself out. Cut ties, protect the girl." Sean didn't answer. Not yet. His mind warred between logic and loyalty, reputation and revenge. The man in him wanted to stay out of it. The father in him, especially to the girl who was finally speaking, wasn't so sure. He never had to decide. Tracy did it for him. She'd been outside the door, listening. Small hands trembling, breath ragged like she was holding in the world. Then, bang. The office doors slammed open and she stormed in, fists balled, eyes wide with fury. "He's my friend," she cried, voice raw and cracking. "Please, help him." The room went still. No one moved. No one breathed. Sean turned slowly, staring at the daughter who'd once lived in silence, now demanding something with thunder in her throat. "You always said you'd do anything for me," Tracy whispered. "Do this." Sean swallowed hard. Something inside him, some rusted gear of control, finally snapped loose. "Clear the room," he said to his advisors. "Now." They hesitated, but one look at his face ended the debate. Within hours, Sean had mobilized every contact he swore he'd never call again. Lawyers, fixers, private militias disguised as security firms, dirty cops with clean suits. Anyone who owed him a favor or feared him enough to deliver. Tracy wasn't allowed in the war room, but she knew something had changed. Her father didn't pace anymore. He acted. Every screen in the command center flickered with intel, possible locations, gang affiliations, traffic cams of the kidnapping route. Sean stood like a general, eyes bloodshot, jaw wired tight. "Bring him home," he said. The warehouse was in the docks, abandoned on paper, crawling with armed guards in reality. Sean's team hit hard and fast, blinding flashbangs, smoke grenades, suppressed gunfire like cracking bones. Inside, Grant was barely conscious, slumped in his chair, lips split, breathing ragged. One of the guards raised a pistol to finish the job. He didn't get the chance. A single shot from Sean's lead merc shattered the man's skull. Chaos exploded. In under 5 minutes, it was over. Grant was bleeding but alive. They rushed him to a private facility, one not listed on any maps, run by doctors who asked no questions. Sean stood outside the operating room, fists coated in someone else's blood, shirt torn, face blank. "He's stable," a nurse finally said. "Barely." Sean nodded, not trusting his voice. Tracy sat beside Grant's hospital bed the next morning, her small hand wrapped around his bruised fingers. His eyes fluttered open, cracked lips forming a ghost of a smile. "You came back," she whispered. "Wouldn't miss it," he rasped, voice like gravel. Her tears fell silently, but her grip didn't loosen. Sean entered the room but said nothing. Just looked at the two of them, his daughter, and the man he once saw as a threat. Now he wasn't so sure. Grant wasn't just part of her story anymore. He was part of her. The press would never know what happened that night. No headlines, no names. Just another whisper in the world of shadows. But within the Scott estate, everything had changed. Tracy had spoken again, louder this time, stronger. Not for herself, for someone else. And Sean, for once in his life, had listened. Voice of a warrior, beeping monitors, antiseptic air, and a soft rhythm of breath were the only sounds in the private recovery suite. Grant blinked against the harsh light overhead, eyelids heavy, pain slicing through every inch of his body like broken glass. He tried to move but couldn't. Everything hurt. Then, warmth. Something small and soft curled around his fingers. He turned his head and saw her. Tracy sat silently, holding his hand like it was a lifeline. Her eyes swollen from crying, but unflinching. She didn't flinch at the bruises or the bandages or the wires tangled around his chest. Her presence was steady, determined, unafraid. And then, softly, she spoke the words that carried more weight than any scream. "You came back." His cracked lips pulled into the faintest smile, stained with dried blood. "Wouldn't miss it," he rasped, the sound like gravel and thunder mixed together. Tracy leaned in and rested her head beside his arm, her tiny fingers still wrapped around his. In that moment, no one else mattered. Not the kidnappers, not the blood, not even Sean Scott's empire. But Sean did come. Quietly. He stood at the edge of the room, dressed in gray, not his usual polished black. Eyes tired, but focused. He didn't speak, just nodded at Grant, an unspoken message of respect, relief, and something else, gratitude. That nod was everything. It said, "You matter now." It said, "I was wrong." It said, "You brought my daughter back to me without ever asking for anything." Grant didn't respond. He didn't need to. 3 days later, reporters lined the estate's main entrance. Cameras buzzing like hornets, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Word had spread about the billionaire's daughter, who had never spoken, suddenly breaking her silence. There were rumors of kidnappings, secret deals, and a mysterious man from the underworld. Sean had been prepared to shield Tracy from all of it, but she surprised him again. Wearing a simple pink dress and holding a microphone with both hands, Tracy stood at the podium like a candle in a storm. She scanned the crowd, so many people, so many eyes, and didn't shrink. One reporter asked, softly, "Why now? Why did you finally speak?" The silence that followed was heavy, taut, filled with more anticipation than noise. And then she answered, "Because he listened." Not a single camera flash went off. No one breathed. It wasn't just a quote. It was a message, a bullet through the noise of the world. The girl who had once been seen as broken had just delivered a truth none of them could ignore. In 5 syllables, she shattered 1,000 assumptions. After the press conference, Tracy walked straight back inside and asked to visit Grant. The doctors tried to protest, but Sean overruled them. She walked into the room, her steps sure, her face calm. "They kept asking me what you did," she said, sitting beside him again. "But all you did was see me." Weeks passed. Grant recovered slowly, his ribs healing, bruises fading, but something deeper mending too. Sean began pulling strings, quietly distancing Grant from old criminal records, erasing his name from certain lists. Officially, Grant Garcia was a ghost. Unofficially, he was something new, something better. One crisp morning, Sean called him to the estate, not to the mansion, but the garden, where Tracy once sat drawing on the curb. There, waiting under a white tent, was a stack of blueprints and a contract. "It's yours," Sean said. "A place where you can do for others what you did for her." Grant didn't speak, just stared at the plans for the mentorship center. The building would be placed in the city's heart, far from gated mansions but close to where kids needed it most. It wouldn't be glossy or pretentious. It would be raw, real, a safe house for the unheard, the overlooked. Grant signed the papers with fingers still stiff from healing. His only condition: Tracy would be the first honorary mentor. The center opened 6 months later with no ribbon, no gala, no press, just kids. Some were mute, some were angry, some were scarred by the streets the way Grant had been. And Tracy, now speaking in full quiet sentences, met each one like an old friend. She showed them how to tell stories with chalk, how to paint silence with color, how to trust again, and most importantly, how to be heard, even without shouting. She had become the bridge between forgotten men and voiceless children. Sean visited sometimes, always from the sidelines. He watched his daughter run programs, help organize art walls, even host storytelling circles. And though she still didn't speak often, when she did, her words carried weight. Some kids don't talk because they're scared. She once told a nervous boy clutching a sketch pad, "I was too, but there's nothing wrong with being quiet." Grant stopped wearing suits, started wearing sneakers and hoodies. He never talked about the past unless asked, but when he did, it wasn't to glorify the crime. It was to teach what not to become. And somehow, that made all the difference. At night, after the center closed, Tracy and Grant would sometimes sit outside on the same curb where they first met. She would rest her head on his shoulder, and he would light a cigarette he never lit, just held between his fingers. They never needed many words. The silence between them was rich, healing, whole. And sometimes, that was enough. When someone gives you your voice, how far would you go to protect theirs? Let us know in the comments. Was Tracy's press conference the closure you needed? Or do you think her journey's just getting started? Family is a choice. The morning sun painted the city gold, casting soft light over the fresh pavement outside the new mentorship center. A banner hung above the entrance, flapping lightly in the breeze. The listening house. Cameras flashed, but not for glitz. This moment was real, earned, and brimming with second chances. In the middle of it all stood Tracy Scott, now 9, wrapped in her signature pink dress, her dark hair tied neatly back with a silk ribbon. She held oversized scissors in her hands, the ribbon taut before her, a smile blooming slowly across her face. Beside her stood Grant Garcia, looking more like a youth mentor than the feared name he once was. No tie, sleeves rolled, clean-shaven, and heart wide open. Tracy turned to him with a nod, and they cut the ribbon together, the crowd erupting in soft applause. She stepped forward to the microphone, her small hands gripping the edges like a pro, her back straight. The chatter died down as everyone leaned in, expecting a few polite words, maybe a thank you. But what they heard was something entirely more powerful. "Some kids are quiet because they want to be," she began, her voice deliberate, clear. "Some because they're scared." I was both. The silence that followed was reverent, as if the air itself didn't want to interrupt her. But I learned something. Being quiet doesn't mean you don't have something to say. She paused, then turned slightly toward Grant and gestured toward him with both hands. "This is my first friend," she said, her voice softening into something intimate and proud. "He didn't try to fix me, he just saw me." Grant's jaw tightened, eyes flickering, as he fought back a rush of emotion he didn't dare show here. Tracy wasn't performing, she was telling the truth. Sean stood nearby, dressed in a pale gray suit, instead of his usual commanding black. His hands were folded, not clenched, and his face bore the lines of both age and humility. He watched his daughter speak, not like a man controlling a narrative, but like a father witnessing a miracle. There was warmth in his posture, still powerful, but softer, like someone who had finally learned how to feel instead of just win. When Tracy looked at him, he didn't flinch. After the crowd dispersed, the staff gave tours of the center. Vibrant walls covered in kid-drawn art, story stations, music corners, and even a graffiti-friendly outdoor wall Grant had designed himself. A treehouse library sat in the courtyard, its shelves already filled with donated books and notebooks full of stories scribbled by quiet hands. Some kids came up to Tracy shyly, asking about her favorite stories, her drawings, her voice. She didn't speak often, but when she did, they listened. Her words weren't loud, but they echoed. Later that evening, the mansion was quiet again, the sun bleeding into orange behind the skyline. Tracy stood barefoot at the edge of the circular driveway, watching fireflies begin their nightly dance. Grant joined her with 2 popsicles, pink and orange, and handed her one without a word. She took it, leaning her head lightly against his arm, the way she always did when she was deep in thought. The mansion loomed behind them, but it felt less like a fortress now, and more like a home. They sat on the same curb they'd met on, shoes touching, wrappers tucked in pockets, watching the world in peaceful silence. After a long pause, Tracy tilted her head up at him and smiled. "You know what?" she said, her voice casual but meaningful. Grant glanced down at her, one brow raised. "What, sunshine?" "This is my favorite spot in the world." Grant's grin was slow, real, tired in the best way. He looked out at the street, the horizon, the place where his life had cracked open and let something new pour in. "Me too, sunshine," he said, his voice thick but steady. The two of them sat there as the fireflies flickered, and the wind carried distant music from the open windows behind them. There was nothing left to say, and that was the beauty of it. She had been born silent. But she wasn't broken. And sometimes, the loudest love comes from the quietest places. And in that silence, they found family, not by blood, but by choice. The kind of bond no voice could ever fully explain. I appreciate you listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting story like this one on your left screen. You'll definitely enjoy it.